I'm going to be moving around in some different places, but I'm coming back to a final message on forgiveness. I've given several, and this is going to be the last one before we move into 2 Corinthians. And I'm going to start out by saying something that's similar to, well, in a wrap-up, I'm going to use a few different pieces that I sprinkled throughout the series of messages, and here's the question. Are you ready? If the measure of your forgiveness, the measure of your forgiveness was actually equated to your wealth in this world. In other words, your wealth was not equated to your wallet or your checkbook or your stock accounts. But if the measure of forgiveness was equated to your wealth in this world, would you be rich or would you be poor? I want to leave time for communion and commitment today. So we are going to skip the baby pool and the deep end and go right off the high dive. I'm revisiting an illustration that I started with in these forgiveness messages. So here we go. For some of you, this is a repeat, but others asked me to try to say this again, and maybe it was confusing. I'm going to try and give it to you again. Listen to this. Are you ready still? I just want to make sure I have your attention. If there is a strain between you and someone else, if there's tension, if there's conflict between you and someone else, and you are just convinced that 95% of the misunderstanding, 95% of the mistake, of the misguided thoughts or ill will falls to the other person, and by the way, it's not, sometimes, I don't know if you've ever heard of what's called Hansen's razor, but there's just an axiom out there that goes on to explain that many times what we think is ill will, sin, and evil, sometimes it's just plain ignorance and stupidity. But I have to keep going and just say this. Let's just say that misunderstanding, that misguided thought, if those fall 95% to the other individual, here it is, you have to be honest with yourself and you have to ask, what do you do with that 5% that belongs to you? Because in almost every conflict, there is some degree, in almost every quarrel, in almost every squabble, everybody say squabble. In almost every squabble, there's a responsibility on both sides. And I say almost because not every, right? Drunk driver homicide, medical malpractice, narcissistic, psychopathic abuse, kids killed by someone else's neglect. I mean, there's only so much we can really get into on a Sunday morning. But for the most part, by and large, what we deal with on the day-to-day, and what I want to say today is this, and I said it before, but people have asked me to repeat it. When it comes to your 5%, 5% of the conflict that belongs to you, you need to 100% own your responsibility for that 5%. Is this okay with, do you get the math? 5%.